A chilling silence fell over the school hallway as every pair of eyes locked onto Adesuwa. Whispers filled the air, some in shock, others in fear. What had she done? She glanced at the clock, 10 hours left, and yet not a single soul knew the storm that was about to hit. Once upon a time in a small village of Pulau, there lived a woman named Osus. She was as beautiful as the evening sun, with a gentle smile that could calm crying babies. But Osas carried a heavy burden in her heart, one that would later shape her daughter's life in ways she never imagined. In the village of Pilau, there was an unspoken rule about babies. Having a fat baby was like wearing the finest gold jewelry to church. When mothers brought their plump babies to village gatherings, people would fight to carry them, showering them with praises sweeter than ripe mangoes. "See how healthy this child is," they would exclaim, pinching the baby's chubby cheeks. "This family must be blessed," others would say, admiring the rolls of baby fat. Osas couldn't help but notice how the chubby babies brought pride to their families, how the gifts piled higher and the compliments never stopped. She had seen too many mothers walk home in shame and isolation as no one wanted to hold their skinny baby. Osas made a silent vow to herself that day. When her time came, her baby would be the one everyone wanted to hold, the one that brought pride to her family, and she would do whatever it took to make it happen. Little did she know what was waiting for her. A few years later, when Osas gave birth to Adesuwa, the baby was tiny, like a small bird that had fallen from its nest too soon. At the village gathering, Osas watched with tears in her eyes as other mothers' babies were passed around like precious gifts while she sat alone in the corner, holding her tiny daughter close. "Is she feeding the child at all?" she heard some women whisper. "Maybe there's no food in their house," another replied, loud enough for Osas to hear. Osas could feel their judgment. She was embarrassed and ashamed. That night, as she cradled Adesuwa, tears filled her eyes. "I will do whatever it takes to make my baby fat and plumpy, no matter the cost." But her choices would lead to unexpected consequences that would change their lives forever. Determined to silence the people, Osas took matters into her own hands. She mixed powdered milk with malt drinks, stirring until the concoction turned thick and creamy. Adesuwa, barely able to hold her tiny head up, was fed day and night. Each time she cried, her mother would whisper to her, "Don't cry, my baby. Soon people will line up to hold you," she murmured. She massaged the baby's body vigorously after each meal, believing that would make her plump faster. As weeks turned into months, Adesuwa's cheeks puffed out like ripe oranges. Her thighs grew round, folding into soft rolls, and her arms jiggled with each movement. Osas beamed with pride whenever neighbors visited. "Osas, your baby is so plumpy and beautiful," pinching Adesuwa's chubby cheeks. The villagers smiled, showering the baby with praise. "She's so soft and cuddly. You have such a beautiful baby." Each time she took Adesuwa to the village square, or any gathering, the villagers lined up to hold her baby, praising and complimenting her. Each compliment fueled Osas to keep feeding and massaging Adesuwa, ensuring that her child remained the picture of perfection in their small village. However, as Adesuwa grew up, something changed. The same people who said her plumpy body was beautiful now whispered cruel remarks as she walked through the market with her mother. "That one will not fit through the door soon if she doesn't stop eating like this," an old woman muttered once, loud enough for Osas to hear. Adesuwa didn't understand the sting in those words then, but she could feel her mother's grip tighten on her hand. The plumpy body that had once brought her mother pride became her biggest source of shame. By the time Adesuwa turned 15, her life had become a daily battle. Her body showed the result of her mother's early choices, the stretch marks that crawled across her belly, thighs, and arms, the rolls that didn't smooth out no matter how tightly the corset was. One day, she sat on the edge of her small wooden bed, staring at the faded mirror propped against the wall. Her oversized gown hung loosely around her, a desperate attempt to hide what couldn't be ignored. She hated mirrors. They always told the truth she desperately tried to forget. At school, her school uniform stretched tight across her body, the buttons struggling to hold everything together. Walking through the school compound was like walking through a forest of sharp thorns. Everywhere she turned, someone was ready to prick her with cruel words. The cruelty was relentless. The children no longer found her size endearing. They would laugh as she walked down the school halls. "Fatty, fatty, bomb bomb," they would sing, pointing and laughing as Adesuwa struggled to fit into the wooden desks. Their mocking words echoed long after the school bell rang. At family gatherings, she hid in the kitchen, pretending to help with food preparation, avoiding the aunties whose unsolicited advice cut deeper than any insult. "Adesuwa, drink lime water every morning," one auntie would say. "Have you tried fasting? It works wonders," another would add, her voice dripping with pity. "Men don't marry women who eat more than them." "Oh," they told her. Each comment chipped away at her confidence, leaving her heart heavy with scars no one could see. One day at school during break time, Adesuwa stood in line at the small kiosk, her stomach growling in anticipation of the meat pie she had been craving all day. Just as she reached the counter, a group of students behind her bursted into laughter. One of the boys pointed at her and mock whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Madam, please don't sell the whole shop to her alone. Ooh!" The others roared with laughter, their eyes boring into her like knives. Adesuwa froze, her cheeks flaming with humiliation. She felt the eyes of the other students on her, some pitying, some openly amused, and some silently judging. The shopkeeper hesitated as he was about to sell the meat pie to Adesuwa, his gaze flickering between her and the group. Adesuwa wanted to disappear, her feet rooted to the ground as if shackled by the weight of their ridicule. As she walked away, head down, the whispers continued, each word sharper than the last. "No wonder she's so big. She should be buying water instead," the students whispered. Adesuwa clenched the paper bag in her trembling hands, fighting back tears. As she looked up, scanning the field for an empty bench, she noticed that all the benches were filled with other students. She saw one that had space for one person, so she approached the bench. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. Zerenia, her heart racing, she couldn't afford any more embarrassment. "Don't let her sit, please. She will push all of us down with her fat bomb-bomb," Amaka said while the others giggled nervously, avoiding her eyes as if her mere presence was an inconvenience. Adesuwa forced a smile, pretending not to care, and walked away as casually as she could manage. When she turned the corner, where nobody could see her, she ran to the toilet, alone in the bathroom stall. She cried silently, the guilt and self-loathing twisting in her chest like a cruel knife. At home, life was a little more bearable. Her mother showered her with praise for even the smallest tasks, her words overflowing with encouragement just to make Adesuwa feel good. She had bought countless weight-loss tea, reduced her food portion, and even made her run every day, but nothing worked. Back at school, everyone was talking about the upcoming play, a grand performance about a princess, complete with dazzling costumes and prizes for the winners. Adesuwa's heart raced with excitement. She had never joined anything at school before, but this time she wanted to try. She wanted to win those prizes, to feel like she belonged, to finally prove she could be more than the quiet, fat girl everyone ignored. But the moment she walked into the audition room, the whisper started. "This one will dance like a cow," one of the judges said, Amaka. One of the mean girls walked to Adesuwa and said, "Princesses are for slim and beautiful girls," her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter that followed felt like tiny knives cutting into Adesuwa's chest. Adesuwa's cheeks burned, but she refused to let them see her cry. She clenched her fists and stood her ground. She wasn't going to let their words stop her. When it was finally her turn to audition, she stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own thoughts. She sang her lines with all the courage she could muster, but when she finished, one of the officials looked her up and down, frowning. "Adesuwa, we don't have your size of dress for the play," he said bluntly, not even trying to soften the blow. Adesuwa felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to nod, her lips trembling. As she left the room, her best friend Diana, who had recently joined the Mean Girls clique, approached her with a smirk. "If only you were slim, Adesuwa," Diana said, her words laced with pity. "You would have a boyfriend, And you could join the princess play like the rest of us. Don't you want to be like us?" Adesuwa didn't respond, but her heart twisted painfully. Diana's words hit harder than she wanted to admit. For years, she had endured the mocking and teasing, but this play, this was her chance. It was too important for her to give up now. She needed to prove to herself that she had more to offer. So with tears threatening filling up her eyes, Adesuwa made a silent vow. She wasn't going to back down. Not this time. At home, Adesuwa couldn't stop replaying the humiliating audition in her head as she sat quietly in the corner of her small room. She thought about the girls' laughter, Diana's pitying words, and the sharp rejection from the officials. That night she made up her mind. She would lose weight, fast. The next morning she barely touched her breakfast. "I'm not hungry, Mama," she said with a forced smile, ignoring the concerned look her mother gave her. Adesuwa spent the day pacing her room, doing endless exercise and drinking cup after cup of the slimming tea her mother had bought months ago. It tasted bitter, but she didn't care. Every sip felt like a step closer to her dream. The next morning, she barely touched her breakfast. Her mother noticed. "Adesuwa, what is going on?" she asked one evening, watching her daughter push her food around on her plate. "You have barely eaten all week, and you're working yourself too hard. What are you trying to do to yourself?" "I'm not hungry, Mama," she said with a forced smile, ignoring the concerned look her mother gave her. Next day, when she came back from school, she met her mother cooking. "Adesuwa, I can leave my food on the fire. Please run to the market and buy palm oil. Please don't take too long," she said, giving her daughter some money. Adesuwa walked to the market. She passed stalls of brightly colored fruits and vegetables, but nothing caught her attention. As she turned into an aisle filled with vendors selling herbs and spices, her eyes locked with those of an old woman sitting behind a small wooden stall. The woman looked ancient, her skin wrinkled like the bark of an old tree, and her piercing eyes seemed to see straight into Adesuwa's soul. The old woman raised her hand and beckoned. "Come," she said softly. Adesuwa shook her head, stepping back instinctively. "No, Mama, I don't want roots or herbs." But the woman didn't look away. Her gaze was steady, almost hypnotic. "I can give you the most important thing you've ever wanted," she said, her voice firm but inviting. Adesuwa froze mid-step, her mind flashing back to the years of torment she had gone through from the hands of the villagers. She turned back to look at the woman, her mind swirling with questions. Could she really help me? Is it even possible? She reached out with trembling hands, her desperation outweighing the fear. "Even if it's for 10 hours, I am willing to do whatever it took," she said to herself. The woman tilted her head slightly, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "I have something for your body," she said. Adesuwa's breath hitched. She looked around quickly to see if anyone else was watching or listening. Satisfied that no one was paying attention, she walked cautiously into the small stall. The old woman reached beneath her table and pulled out a bundle of dried roots, tied together with a string. "Boil these and drink the water," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It will make you slim, but only for 10 hours. After that," before the woman could finish her sentence, Adesuwa grabbed the roots from her hands. Her desperation drowned out any warnings or hesitation. "I don't care about but, Mama," she said, her voice shaking with determination. "Even if it's just for 2 hours, that's enough for me to finish my play. That's all I need." The old woman narrowed her eyes. "Are you sure, young lady? This choice cannot be undone." "Yes, Mama, I am very sure," Adesuwa said firmly, clutching the roots like they were her lifeline. Adesuwa turned and walked quickly out of the stall, her heart racing. She didn't look back. She didn't want to think about consequences or warnings. All she could see was her chance to prove herself, her chance to be a princess. The next morning, Adesuwa stood over the pot as the herbs boiled, a strange aroma filling the air. Her hands trembled slightly as she added the spices, just as the old woman had instructed. The concoction bubbled with an eerie hiss, and she could feel her heart pounding against her chest. What if this doesn't work, she thought, but desperation drowned out her doubts. She poured the potion into a plastic cup, held her breath and drank it in one swift gulp. Within seconds, a strange warmth coursed through her body, starting from her stomach and spreading to her limbs. She bent over, clutching the edge of the counter, as a tingling sensation crept over her skin. She stumbled to the mirror, and what she saw left her speechless. Her round cheeks slimmed into high cheekbones. Her double chin vanished, and her arms, once soft and heavy, became lean and toned. Her stomach flattened, and her waist curved perfectly. The fat melted off her body. Her body became sleek, her skin glowed, and her cheekbones stood out like carved ivory. She gasped, her hands trembling as she touched her new face and body. "It worked! It really worked!" she screamed, her voice filled with disbelief and joy. Her scream of excitement echoed through the house, startling her mother, who rushed into the room. "Adesuwa! What's wrong?" Her mother froze mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she stared at her transformed daughter. "Adesuwa, what is this? What have you done?" "I'll explain later, Mama," Adesuwa blurted, grabbing her bag. "I don't have time. I have to get to school." Before her mother could stop her, she was out the door, her heart racing with excitement. When Adesuwa arrived at school, every head turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as students stared, their jaws dropping. The morning sun wrapped around her new body like a golden wrapper, making her skin glow like shea butter. The boys who had once mocked her with cruel nicknames now looked at her like she was a goddess descended from heaven. The girls, especially the ones from the It Girl clique, who had always sneered and laughed behind her back, suddenly looked intrigued. "Is that Adesuwa?" one boy whispered, nudging his friend. "No way! It can't be her! She looks... Wow!" another stammered. Adesuwa held her head high, her confidence soaring. For the first time she felt seen. The mean girls approached her with their perfectly rehearsed smiles. "Hello, Adesuwa," Diana, her former friend turned clique member, said sweetly. "You look very different. Do you want to join us for lunch later? We've been meaning to hang out." Adesuwa's lips curled into a smile, but she shook her head. "Maybe later," she replied, smiling, walking past them. In her heart, she felt a surge of triumph. So this is what it feels like, she thought. Some girls who had been struggling with their weight approached her. "Adesuwa, you look really good. What's the secret?" they asked. "Oh, I exercised a lot," she answered, walking away, not giving them the chance to probe more. She had been practicing the play in secret, even after being rejected. Now she was determined to prove herself. When she entered the auditorium for the audition, a hush fell over the room. The judges exchanged surprised glances, and the girls who had mocked her stared, their confidence faltering. Adesuwa stepped forward, radiating poise and beauty. She recited her lines with such grace and emotion that the judges were left speechless. When she finished, the lead judge cleared his throat and announced, "Congratulations, Adesuwa. You'll play the princess." The whole auditorium cheered. Adesuwa's heart swelled with pride. The moment she had dreamed of was finally hers. She left the auditorium with her head held high, ignoring the envious stares and whispered gossip. That evening, the auditorium was packed with students, parents, and teachers. Adesuwa stood backstage in the shimmering princess gown, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. She glanced at the clock. Her 10 hours were almost up, but there was still time to shine. The play began, and Adesuwa owned the stage. Her voice was steady, her movements elegant, and her performance captivating. The audience loved her performance, and when she was done, the applaud was so loud. The principal stepped forward to present her with the grand prize, a scholarship. Tears welled up in Adesuwa's eyes as she accepted the certificate, her heart bursting with happiness. For the first time, she felt like her dreams were within reach. But as she bowed to the audience, she felt a strange chill run through her body. The warmth that had enveloped her earlier was fading. She glanced at her hands. They were plumping up again. Her stomach churned as she felt the weight return to her arms and thighs. The 10 hours were up! Adesuwa ran from the stage, her feet pounding against the hardwood floor as she ran to the bathroom. Her breathing was shallow, panic clawing at her chest. She slammed the door shut and looked at mirror. What she saw made her gasp. The slim, toned body she had been admiring that morning was gone. Right before her eyes, rolls of fat began to return, stretching her skin as if her body were inflating like a balloon. The delicate princess dress, designed to fit her transformed frame, struggled against her expanding body. Her arms jiggled, her face rounded, and the smooth stretch of her neck disappeared into a second chin. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her reflection. The stretch marks she had fought so hard to hide reappeared, bold and jagged, slicing through her skin like cruel reminders of her old self. But this time, it wasn't just her old self, it was worse. Her skin sagged under the weight, loose and unsteady, as though her body couldn't keep up with the sudden changes. Her glowing skin turned blotchy, and her jawline contorted into a grotesque shape. The dress finally tore open. Adesuwa tried to cover herself with some part of the fabric. A sharp knock on the door snapped her out of her spiral. "Adesuwa, are you in there?" the girls called. "We're looking for you. Please, we want to take pictures with you." The boys were knocking, also fighting about who will take her out on a date. Adesuwa's heart sank further. She didn't want them to see her like this. She turned around and saw another door. She ran out the other door. With the ripped dress, she ran and ran until she reached the front door of her house. Pushing it open, she collapsed inside, trembling and broken. "No, no, no, no!" Adesuwa screamed, her voice breaking into sobs. She looked, her face now unrecognizable, her body distorted beyond her worst fears. Tears streamed down her face as she cried, "Mama, help me! Please help me." Her mother, who had been waiting anxiously at home, jumped up only to freeze in shock. "Adesuwa, what? What is happening to you?" Her family rushed to the living room, whispering in hushed, frightened tones. Her younger sister, Chidinma, stared at her in terror. Her father, frozen but visibly shaken, held his wife's hand tightly. "Mama, Papa," Adesuwa began, her voice trembling. "We need to go back to the market. The old woman who gave me the potion. She must have a cure. Please, I can't live like this." Her parents looked at each other, torn between anger at their daughter's reckless decision and fear for her life. They just could not understand what was going on with their daughter. Her father, trying to diffuse the seriousness of the situation, walked over to help Adesuwa to her feet. Then he finally broke the silence. "Adesuwa, it's night and the market is close. But I promise you, we will go to the market first thing in the morning. But you have to tell us what happened." With a heavy heart, Adesuwa looked at her family, her voice trembling as she narrated her encounter with the old woman. Very early in the morning, before the sunrise, her family set out to the market. They did not want people to see what Adesuwa looked like. They covered her from head to with a big flowing boo-boo dress. As she approached the stall, "It was here," Adesuwa said, pointing to a spot between the yam sellers and the bead makers. The old woman's stall was right here. But where the mysterious stall had been, there was nothing but empty space and red dust. No signs that anyone had ever sold anything there at all. "Mama!" Adesuwa cried, falling to her knees. "She was here! I swear she was here!" A pepper seller arranging her baskets nearby looked up. "Ah, you're looking for the beauty woman?" she asked, her wise eyes taking in Adesuwa's covered form. "Yes!" Adesuwa's mother rushed forward. "Please, where can we find her?" The pepper seller clicked her tongue. "That one? She comes and goes like the wind. Nobody knows where she comes from or where she goes. Some say she appears when someone is desperate enough to do anything for beauty." She peered at Adesuwa. "I suppose you didn't let her finish her warning, eh?" Adesuwa's heart sank like a heavy stone in water. What warning? "She always warns people about the price of quick beauty," the pepper seller said, shaking her head. "But young people these days, they never wait to hear the end of anything." Adesuwa's father stepped forward, his voice stern but pleading. "Please, there must be a way to find her. Look at what has happened to my daughter." The old woman's gaze turned somber. "Sometimes the price of vanity cannot be undone. You must bear this burden now." Exhausted and heartbroken, they returned home. Days turned into weeks. Adesuwa refused to leave her room. She covered every mirror with old newspapers, unable to face what she had become. Her mother brought food to her door, but most of it went untouched. Her father hired the best native doctors from neighboring villages, but none of their medicines worked. Even the pastor from their church came to pray, but Adesuwa's body remained twisted and strange. The villagers mocked her for her appearance. Children in the village pointed and laughed, calling her the monster woman. Even her family struggled to look at her without flinching. At night, she could hear her mother crying in the parlor. "It's all my fault," her mother would say to her father. "If I had not forced her to be fat as a baby, if I had not made her feel like she wasn't good enough, all these would not happen." Adesuwa hated her new body. She had covered all the mirror in her room, unable to face the creature she had become. Desperate for answers, Adesuwa's family turned to spiritual leaders, herbalists, and even neighboring villagers known for their mystical knowledge. Each visit ended the same way. There was no cure for her. One morning, after another sleepless night, Adesuwa sat in her dimly lit room, staring at the covered mirror, but deep inside she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. She took a deep breath, stood up, and walked towards the mirror. Her hands trembled as she hesitated, holding the fabric that covered the mirror. "Enough," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. With a sharp pull, she uncovered the mirror, revealing her reflection. For the first time in months, she truly looked at herself. The rolls, the stretch marks, the sagging skin, they were all there, looking back at her. But instead of feeling the usual wave of disgust and despair, something inside her shifted. She saw beyond the imperfections, beyond the scars. She saw herself, the strong girl who had endured so much. The girl who had tried and failed, but never gave up. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her reflection, her voice cracking. "I've hated you for so long, but you're still here. You have carried me through everything." A small smile crept across her face. "I love you," she said softly, her voice growing steadier. "I love myself. Fat or thin, beautiful or strange. You are mine. You are me. And I love you." Suddenly, she felt a strange warmth course through her body, like a gentle current of energy flowing from her head to her toes. Her skin tingled, and she gasped as she watched her reflection. Slowly, her body began to transform, not into the slim, toned figure she had once envied, but back to her original self. The sagging skin tightened, her stretch marks softened, and her face glowed with a natural radiance she hadn't seen in years. Adesuwa screamed in shock and joy, her hands flying to her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Mama! Papa!" she called out, her voice ringing with excitement. Her parents rushed into the room, alarmed by her scream. But when they saw her, they froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Adesuwa! Is that you?" her mother whispered, her hands covering her mouth. "It's me, Mama," Adesuwa said, laughing and crying at the same time. "It's me." Her parents ran to her, hugging her tightly. "We love you so much, my daughter," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're beautiful just the way you are." Her mother pulled back, her face wet with tears. "Adesuwa, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought I was helping you when you were a baby, but I didn't realize the harm I was doing. Please forgive me." Adesuwa nodded, her heart swelling with love and forgiveness. "I forgive you, Mama. I forgive myself too." From that day on, Adesuwa decided to live her life differently. She stopped chasing an impossible ideal and focused on being healthy, happy, and true to herself. She learned to appreciate her body for what it was, a vessel that carried her through life's challenges and triumphs. And in the end, she discovered the most powerful magic of all, self-love. The moral lesson of this story is, true beauty cannot be bought, borrowed, or stolen. It is found in self-acceptance, resilience, and kindness. Those who seek validation from other people run the risk of losing themselves in the process. So viewers, if you love this story like I did, please click on the like button, share with your friends and family, and please subscribe for more enchanting stories. Thank you, and see you in the next video.